Today is the Super Bowl, I understand. And in addition to being the Super Bowl, it's also the day that we celebrate the presentation of Jesus in the temple, otherwise known as Candlemass. February 2nd is actually the feast day of the presentation. We translate it a day forward so that we can celebrate as a community in our Sunday worship. And you may know that February 2nd is also Groundhog Day. February 2nd is 40 days after after Christmas, which fits in nicely with the tradition that Jesus was raised in, that he would be presented in the temple 40 days after his birth. And there are lots of legends associated with this feast of the church, Groundhog Day being one of them. And many of these legends are about the turning of the seasons, about the natural world, what is happening in winter. Groundhog Day, obviously, is about what's going to happen in the next 6 weeks, whether we're going to have warm weather or if winter's going to hang around. So what's interesting about the correlation of Groundhog Day, as well as these other legends with the presentation of Jesus in the temple, is how intimately connected the celebrations of the church year were with what was happening in the natural world for pre-Enlightenment, pre-Industrial Revolution Christians. There was a rhythm to life, a way of tracking the seasons of the earth that went hand in hand with the seasons of the church year. I mean, take Christmas, for example. That is a celebration of light coming into the world, and we do that in the darkest, on nearly the darkest day of the year. Lent means spring, and it's a preparation for new birth in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So there's definitely a lot of connection with what's going on in the world, in the earth, in the seasons, and what's going on in our faith tradition. We received many gifts from the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, and certainly the changes that we've seen in the 20th century, for example, are astounding. But lost in translation is the beauty of living so closely with the natural world, with God's beautiful, perfect, and ever-renewing creation. We separated faith from our lives, from the rhythm of our lives, and made our practice of faith about believing with our brains, intellectual agreement to something. And in the process, we lost much of the richness of generations and generations of tradition. We lost that connection with God through the natural world, and we experienced a divide. Now, many people, I think, generally speaking, baby boomers and younger, have felt this loss for sure. They have sought God and nature. I can't tell you how many times somebody has said to me, "Oh, the trail, that is my Sunday service," or "I go to the ocean, that's where I pray." And that's something I understand. We are missing that in Christianity right now. There is a reason the development of Christian practice wove so beautifully with the changing seasons. It makes sense. It nourishes our souls and spirits in a way that a Christian faith lacks, which gets stuck in intellectual belief and agreement. Today, Jesus is presented in the temple, and Simeon, a faithful man of God, upon whom the Holy Spirit rested, was drawn to the temple that same day. He had understood that God would not let him die until he met the Messiah. Then in Luke's Gospel, Simeon sings his song, "Lord, you now have set your servant free to go in peace as you have promised. For these eyes of mine have seen the salvation which you have prepared for all people, a light to enlighten the nations and the glory of your people Israel." For generations of Christians, this song has been prayed daily in evening prayer and at Compline, or prayer at bedtime. We sing it every time we do an evensong here, for example. But the next thing Simeon says is perhaps the most profound, and maybe because it is so often overlooked. Simeon addresses Mary, Jesus' mother, and says, "This child is destined for the falling and the rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be opposed, so that the inner thoughts of many will be revealed." Simeon has just named the struggle of Jesus' entire life and ministry. He knows that with Jesus, things are going to get shaken up and split apart. It's not going to be an easy time, because what Jesus brings, this light and salvation, is not something that many people want. Now that may not make sense, but let's think about it a minute. What does light and salvation mean? For the powerful, for the unjust, for the unmerciful, it means a reversal of that. It means letting go of power. It means acting justly and being merciful. It means loving the least of these, those most difficult to love. For those harboring resentments and anger, it means having that exposed and letting it go. It means looking at oneself instead of pointing the finger at other people. Light and salvation means health and wholeness. And there are many people who are not seeking such things for their lives. There are many people who are comfortable in their discomforts and in their illness. And there are many more who are not interested in seeking it for others. In the gospel reading for this Sunday, now remember we had the readings for presentation, which was actually yesterday, but if we had done the gospel reading that was assigned today, we would have heard the story about Jesus healing a crippled man. And before he heals him, Jesus asked the man, "Do you want to be made well?" Do you want to be made well? This is really the heart of the matter. Do you want health and salvation and light? Do you want to let go of those things that are hanging on inside of you? The anger, the resentment, the hurt, the fears? It's easy to say yes, but in reality, these things that make us sick, besides the natural process of aging, of course, are most likely things that we don't want to change. It's scary to make changes. We feel stuck and we feel powerless to change. At the risk of cliche, I want to take a look at the example of alcoholism. Alcohol serves a function in the alcoholic's life. It insulates and numbs. It lets the pain of life stay outside, out there, someone else's fault. For an alcoholic, getting healthy means shifting things back to the self, recognizing one's own powerlessness, taking responsibility, quitting the blame game, and turning one's life over to God. It means being connected, staying related, not only to people and places and community, but the relatedness of humility that recognizes we are one small part of this great and beautiful natural world in which we live. Alcohol numbs that humility and disconnects the soul from its suffering as well as from its joys. It disconnects the soul from God, this source of light and life and love and salvation and health. Alcoholism yields illusions of control and power, when really there is no such thing. Now, that's one example of many. I'm sure we all have something inside of us that we don't want brought to the light, that we don't want other people to know about, that we are afraid of having exposed. It's part of our nature, and it's exactly what we want to keep hidden that must come out in order for us to heal. In so many ways, our denial of our relatedness, our connectedness,